Africa We Want, a slogan designed on the Africa's flagship Agenda 2063. Hello to you, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us on this weekend edition of the program. It is Global Insight on the Pan-African Television for you, Media Africa. Today we want to accentuate on the continental institution, that is the African Union, asking the question, what is at stake as the continent stands at the forefront of issues at the global world, particularly. Now we want to look at the preamble of the Organization of African Unity, which we now see as the African Union, and see to what extent the number one institutional bloc has met up with the demands of the continent, answering the questions of what the stakes are. You know, former and later Mauritanian President Mokhtar Ould Dada, in his speech during the inaugural session that was in 1963, said, and I quote, "We are the focus of attention of the entire world, especially our African peoples, and the greatest crime we can commit against these people is to fail. In global politics, Africa stands at the central stage of superpower, and these nations in recent times have engaged fully in diplomatic relations with the African continent." So today we ask, however, what tenets can the African Union hold to benefit from this increasing multilateralism and fulfill the dream of the founding father of the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union. What quality institutional reforms need to take place at the level of the African Union to ensure sustainability in realizing continental projects? And you are on to Global Insight at this moment. As the world is changing narratives, Africa becomes more and more attractive to countries around the global world, and to use, of course, the recent statement coming from the Nigerian business magnate Aliko Dangote, during a discussion with the Rwandan President Paul Kagame, highlighted the need that Africa needs to harness the opportunities present for the continent is the future. So today on the program Global Insight, we want to understand all of these stakes and look at the available scope that the African continent or the African Union has, and also analyze some of the setbacks or the hindrances making this number one institutional bloc difficult to bring to realization or the practical realization of holistic continental projects. I won't be doing this alone. I'll be taking you straight away to the United States of America. We're being joined by ACHILLE. He's a banker and also international financial expert. Hello to you, Mr. Eke, and welcome to today's edition of Global Insight.
Good morning, Ms. WIYDORVEN. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. Good morning to all the listeners across the world of this program. It's a pleasure for me to be part of your guest today discussing this important topic. Thank you so much for the invitation.
And also thank you for accepting to be with us today. To Canada, let's welcome Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, who is Director for the Africa Center of the Center for Africa Development. Welcome, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU.
Thanks for having me, Clarice. It's an opportunity one more time to have a fruitful discussion on our beautiful continent, and hopefully we'll have a fruitful discussion in the next 2 hours or so. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you in this discursive program. Dr. Rashid from Ghana will be joining us subsequently. Also, Professor Mark Anthony AKHUMBOM will be joining us as we continue with the program. Just to remind our viewers that this is a discursive and insightful program that brings understanding to the major stakes affecting the global world, particularly Africa, and looking at how Africa can define its agenda, its own place, given that multilateralism is on the rise across the African continent. We're going to go straight away and kicking off with you, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU. I want us to have an understanding of the preamble of the Organization of the African Unity, which now holds as the African Union, and of course the peculiarities of this organization.
Okay, thank you, Clarice. The preamble is very large. It has so many articles in that preamble, but in a nutshell, all what they are trying to do is, number one, to achieve African unity and solidarity between the African states, and there are many tools that they intend to use. They also want to defend the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Africa. Many tools that they want to use. They want to accelerate political independence and economic independence in Africa. There are many projects that they want to use as well, and they want to defend common interests of all Africans all over the world. One of their projects is to bring Africans in the diaspora. When we talk about diaspora, we're not just talking about Africans that have left Africa to North America, Europe, and the rest. They are also including the Caribbeans as well. A lot of Africans there. They are trying to unite the African race all over the world as well, and they're trying to encourage international cooperation between Africa. Remember when I say Africa, and then just talk about one state, Africa as a whole. And one of the things they're also trying to do is to promote peace, security between states as well. So all these, there are so many of them, but all these culminate into what we call the Agenda 2063 of the African Union. So they have gigantic projects, good ideas that they have put together. And some of the things that we're going to be discussing is how far are they going with these projects? You know, they talked about silencing guns, which was one of their projects, which seems not to have materialized. Silencing guns by 2020, if I remember very correctly. That's a project that they have on their table. One of their current projects they have on their table. And they also have the judicial aspect as well, which is, you know, promote and protect human rights within Africa. That's why you see the African human rights courts that they are talking about now. They want to set that up, and some countries are doing theirs individually, but they want to set up a central one. Not only that, they want to establish conditions that will enable the continent to play the rightful role, because Africa, as we know, is the bedrock of the resources that are being used in the world today for technology, innovation, whatever you want to name it. It comes from Africa, but Africa is not playing a major role in that transformation of raw materials into goods and services for people.
Okay.
Yet Africa has those raw materials. So one of the things they want to do is Africa should be at the table in terms of deciding and making decisions when it comes to these mineral resources. Not only that, they want to, you know, coordinate a technology program for Africa, which is to say they want to send, you know, a satellite to the moon. But all those are still, you know, in writing and so on. So African Union and African as a whole and their preamble, it's very, very lucrative when you look at it. It's very, very promising when you look at it. It's very, very enticing when you look at it. But again, they always say in English, the devil is in the details. When you now break it down to the details, what is Africa doing in regards to these noble ideas and noble aspirations?
And that
which
is
is a
what we are
challenge
going
I think we need to look into as we discuss.
Absolutely, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU. That is where we want to actually pinpoint and see the obstacles impeding the full implementation of this very beautiful project advocated by the African Union. Coming to you, ACHILLE, we want to have a holistic understanding, maybe your own point of view of maybe the developments which have occurred since we moved from the Organization of the African Unity to present the African Union analyzing the scope for execution of Continental projects.
Thank you, Clarice, for the invitation.
Yeah.
The Pan-African movement has sought a unified, integrated, and affluent Africa for decades. The 2001 creation of the African Union has revived this long-held dream through ambitious continental programs and efforts. However, as these initiatives increase, African governments face unprecedented risks. The African Continental Free Trade Area, perhaps the world's largest, presents huge prospects and problems. The AFTA may enhance intra-African commerce, economic growth, and a real African single market for a billion consumers by eliminating barriers and allowing free trade. However, aligning trade regulations, combating protectionist instincts, and improving infrastructure are crucial to its success. The program for infrastructure development in Africa, the acronym is PIDA, addresses the infrastructure gap. PIDA may link the continent's economy with transport, energy, ICT, and water infrastructure. But funding this goal will need hundreds of billions of investments, a massive challenge that might determine regional connectivity and economic competitiveness. So the African Union's Agenda 2063, as mentioned by Dr. ENOAKU earlier, outlines inclusive growth, sustainable development, good governance, and continental unity. So excellent aims, but governance, capacity, and coordination issues must be addressed. So all these endeavors are based on the existential question: can Africa's 55 varied nations unite politically and economically to become a global power? Empowering a continent with a young workforce, abundant natural resources, and growing consumer markets to shape its growth is the prize. However, simmering border tensions, democratic weaknesses, institutional inertia, socioeconomic inequities, and capacity restrictions hinder that trajectory. So Africa's leaders and people must remain committed to democratic institutions, policy harmonization, and fair development to achieve this ambitious integration goal. So as Africa moves toward continental unity, the stakes are significant. It may revive the economy, restructure infrastructure, and expand global influence. If wasted, it might maintain the fragmented status quo of low economic development and global influence. Success is difficult, but its generational influence makes it worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you for that, ACHILLE. Okay, now I stay with you. Given all you've highlighted, let's look at the aspect of financial independence. You quite highlighted the fact that there is global influence across the African continent, and to be with me that the leaders of the African Union and even of the African Union Commission, which I will quote the AUC chair Musa Faki Muhammad, underscored recent in past years that they are aware of the increased multilateralism across the African continent. And recently, 2 days ago, during the Africa CEO Forum, President Paul Kagame of Rwanda highlighted that Africa does not need to beg for space at the table, especially when it comes to international issues. But now Africa has to make its voice heard. So the question, can we say that financial independence is that aspect or that tool that is maybe ensuring that, derailing the full implementation of the Continental project, especially as far as in engagement with international bodies are concerned?
Right. So if we look at the Agenda 2063, as the African Union, as the African Union's 50-year strategic framework for social economic transformation of the continent, that agenda was adopted in 2015. So the first 10-year implementation, between 2014 and 2023 has been mixed in terms of progress. We look at that, we only see 5 of the 20 goals, that have been assessed as being more than 70% implemented, with goals like transform economies lagging behind at only 17% implementation. And only 10 countries like Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Senegal have been able to implement 50% or more of the goals. And so 11 countries, including South Africa, have implemented, about 30% or less, of that goal. So there's also lack of data and statistics, that prevents effective tracing or monitoring of that agenda. So, but the main issue that we have also is the fact that the African Union itself, is not financed, 100% by Africans. So because of that fact, we also have pressure from people who are financing our organization. It's nice to have a good plan, not to have goals, but how are we going to fund that? It has to start by funding our own organizations first. That's the first place we need to start. And so if people who are funding those organizations, our organization and the African Union and other organizations that we have across the continent, they have their own agenda and they want us to be able to cater to those agendas too. And so those are all difficulties that Africa right now has, in really achieving those different goals that it's envisioned for the continent in the next 50 years. But this doesn't mean we can't do anything. We have a lot that we can do, and it's going to depend heavily on our different governments. But it's also going to it's going to be depending on how unified the continent is in achieving, those goals. Because if we're not unified, it's going to be hard for us to really make a dent into what we're trying to achieve here.
Okay, thank you so much. Talking about unification, I would love that you accentuate more on this, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, because, debates have actually surfaced lately where people want to understand what it actually means, the unification of Africa. Is it making the whole continent one country, or what aspects of peculiarities of unification are we talking about, and what scope does unification present for the materialization of these gigantic programs advocated for by under the African Union Agenda 2063, particularly the free trade zone?
Okay, Clarice, I'm always clear on this point when I talk to my Pan-African friends. I don't like to chase shadows. I don't like to chase shadows. I'm a pragmatic person. I know a lot in the Pan-African movement who think that Africa should go through a fusion where every state is going to lose its identity, and then we have the United States of Africa. That sounds very noble idea and big slogan, but that is not what the problem is. That is not what the problem is. We are talking about the removal of boundaries. Those boundaries are economic boundaries. Those boundaries are financial boundaries. Those boundaries are technological boundaries. Those boundaries, these things that we deal with on day-to-day life, not some gigantic philosophy and talking about Kwame Nkrumah. We know that Kwame Nkrumah had that idea of the United States of Africa and he lost. And we are at this stage now, and our number one problem is not the removal of physical boundaries and then we fuse the whole Africa into one gigantic country, one president of Africa. That's not the problem. That's why not the problem. We're talking about a workable solution for Africa. Now, you talk about the free trade, particularly. Let me come back to that. Dangote, that you mentioned a while ago, when he was speaking, he said, Africa needs investment and Africa needs to be attractive. And he was trying to dissuade the African leaders to walk away from so much dependence on raw materials, because that, if you look at African economies, for example, Clarice and gentlemen who are watching us, if you look at the African economies, if you look at the way the budget of African economy is formulated, they are so dependent, almost close to 80 to 90% on being funded by natural resources. An economy cannot be so dependent on natural resources with the fluctuations that we have in the world when it comes to natural resources. So Africa should make itself attractive to the world. There is no country that is going to be an island. It's true that we are talking about decolonization and we talk against neo-colonialism and so on, but Africa is not going to isolate itself from the world. The world is becoming a global village, and we will need financing, we will need investment, we will need international organizations, we will need our international partners, we're talking about partners with goodwill and good faith, to come in and work with Africa to realize this project. Imagine on the Agenda 2063, the number one pillar on that is the integrated of high-speed train all across Africa. That is linking all the capital cities of Africa through a high-speed railway. This is not a project that is going to be realized on slogans. This is not a project that's going to be realized simply by selling commodities in Africa. It's going to be realized by making Africa attractive to our international partners so that we partner with the rest of our partners in the world to realize this project. You are talking about the African Free Trade Zone, which my colleague, Mr. EKEU, just mentioned, and you alluded to as well. That is a project that can begin today and end, I don't know, maybe in 4, 5, 6 years, if the political will is there. The problem is that the political will is not there from the African countries that want to implement this. They say this thing as a slogan, but when it comes to practical aspect of, what does it take for African Union to come together and say, look at our borders. We've discussed this on your show some time ago and said, what does it take for a Cameroonian to travel to Kenya, for a Kenyan to travel to Uganda, for a Ugandan to travel to Nigeria? Why would an African resident need a visa to travel and do business within Africa? And we have had a lot of testimonies where people have said it was easy for them to get a visa to go to Europe, to do business in Europe, than getting a visa in a neighboring African country to go and do business. Sure. What does it take to remove those barriers? That is something that the African countries and the African Union and the African Free Trade Committee can start doing tomorrow. Then the first one that we talked about, the integrated high-speed train, it takes a lot of investment. But there are other low-hanging fruits that the African Union and the African Free Trade Zone Committee can start working on today, and they realize that we don't need a lot of finances to get that one done. What does it take to harmonize our fiscal policies in such a way that when it comes to monetary policies, we harmonize that on the African continent in such a way that the billions of dollars that African countries are losing every day because of exchange rate, you have to, a Nigerian want to trade with a Kenyan, you have to change Naira into Kenyan shillings. And most of the time, there's not direct exchange between Naira and Kenyan shilling. You have to go through the dollar. And as you go through the dollar, from the dollar now to Kenyan shillings, that is a lot of loss that we have within Africa. In fact, the last time I looked at the numbers that we lose in Africa in terms of, this non-harmonization of our monetary policy, it's in billions of dollars. It's not in millions. It's in billions of dollars that you're missing. So what does it take for African countries to come together to harmonize a single monetary system that is going to save us a lot of money? Now we talk about the formulation of an African community strategy. That's to say, what Dangote was talking about the other day. He said, we shouldn't be so dependent on exporting raw materials and without formulating a strategy around those raw materials, which is something the African Union has talked about for years and years. What does it take, Clarice, and ladies and gentlemen that are listening to us, for African countries to say, we are not going to export our raw materials until countries or organizations or companies that want to exploit those materials agree to a commodity strategy where we say these materials must be semi-finished on the continent of Africa before they're being transported to the Western world. What does it take? It doesn't take rocket science, and it doesn't take a lot of finances. I know a lot of the projects, they take a lot of...
interject, Dr. Elijah, but I stay with you. You quite mentioned the political will. I want us to understand maybe there are some underlying factors that if we addressed today, we are going to attain this milestone. When the Organization of the African Unity came, there were the preamble, I beg your pardon, that highlighted and dictated the sovereignty of each and every state, that should be respected. But now, do you think that the African Union has the real powers that can help it mastermind all of these programs, maybe put an end to the illegal circulation of small arms, ensure financial independence of the continent, ensure political unity and economic unity, and all that you can name? How is this preamble actually counteracting or reducing the powers of the African Union that countries find it difficult to relinquish part of their autonomy powers to the better execution of activities at the level of the African Union?
Excellent question, Clarice. Excellent question. And let me answer you in a way that will be very, very practical. You see, when that preamble was put in place, the idea is, let me borrow a statement from the European Union. The idea was to create a preamble where every stakeholder, which is the individual countries, they are going to put their house in order. What do I mean by that? We are going to organize in such a way that there are yardsticks to be made by every country in order to participate in the African Free Trade Zone. For example, I'm just picking one. Let's take the African Free Trade Zone. One, there will be preambles that says, your economy, you must put in place checks and balances that are going to make sure that money is not flowing out in terms of illegal money laundering, because if you look at what Africa is losing every year in terms of money laundering and tax shelters all over the place, you are going to put a platform in place, and every country that wants to partake in that free trade zone is going to make sure that their policies when it comes to monetary laundering and all these other vices, they are respected before you are admitted. Number two, you are going to make sure that, Even though we talk about free trade zone, you're not going to bring in warmongers and arms across the border. There will be checks and balances in place in such a way that countries that are in war, they're going to put their house in order, and all those things will be outlined on who enters and who goes out. Number three, you're going to understand that when the African Free Trade Zone came about, the whole world was in panic because you are talking about close to 3-point-something trillion economy. And most countries in the West, they have already signed agreement with individual African countries. So they were now jittering and say, what does it mean with our agreement with Cameroon? What does it mean with our agreement with Nigeria? What does it mean with our agreement with Rwanda? They were already jittering because they know what they are benefiting by, doing business on an individual level with these countries. Now, when they have to deal with an African body that has harmonized the laws with all these countries, it will be difficult for them to maneuver their way and have what they want, because everything will be done through an African body that puts checks and balances in place to make sure that all those ills that they were being manipulated in individual countries will put in place. So when it comes to those hurdles that we see some countries trying to resist, some countries are poor, if we relinquish our sovereignty, it's not even relinquishing of sovereignty. You are instead, integrating what other countries are benefiting from. For example, if you look at Nigeria, that we call the giant of Africa, Nigeria has gone far in terms of manufacturing. How can neighboring countries or the rest of Africa benefit from that economic juggernaut in terms of transferring technology within African states? Number two, how can we harmonize the tax system in such a way that if we have a Dangote in Nigeria, the Dangote in Rwanda or Dangote in Cameroon is not going to be charged terribly for taxes, because that is one company that is being traded within within a free trade zone. Dangote is not going to be going through a lot of exchanging when it comes to exchanging currency from one country to other, trading one country to other. All that is going to be harmonized. Let's look at infrastructure, for example. If we have an integrated high-speed train network within Africa, the cost of production in Africa is going to come down significantly, because one of the things that is killing Africa is that infrastructure network, which my colleague already mentioned at the top of the program.
Absolutely.
Goods that are produced in Cameroon, for example, where you are, it is very difficult even to transport them, or within the CEMAC zone. We're talking about Congo, we're talking about Gabon, we're talking about, because the infrastructure network is not even there to trade within neighboring countries. Talk not of trading within far countries from Africa. So when that framework is put in place, countries that are afraid of their independence, of their sovereignty, will rather benefit, because they will receive these goods and services at a far lower rate, That is why there is no competitiveness between African countries, because the European Union and the West, they will ship these goods, through ships and so on. And some of them, we all know they're subsidized. And when they come to Africa, Africa becomes a dump. The same goods can be produced in an African country, but for them to compete with those goods that are coming abroad, it becomes very difficult. So it makes African goods and services very, very they cannot compete with what's coming out from the rest of the world, because of this lack of infrastructure network within Africa. So those countries that might be thinking that they are going to lose that sovereignty because, if we open the borders, if we trade with these, if we lose our if we loosen our fiscal system, we are going to lose this. On the nutshell, if you look at the negative and the positive on the nutshell, it's a win-win for every African country. Okay. So all those complaints that some countries give, like the big ones and Kenya and the rest, they might say, oh no, if we open our borders, we're going to bring in people with low income and so on. No country, if you look at the world, Clarice.
I will come back to you, Dr. Elijah.
Let me just finish this point.
Yes.
If you look developed countries, whether you talk about Canada or United States or any other country in the world, any country that has closed its borders to immigrants cannot prosper. If you look at Canada and the way Canada is prospering, is becoming the El Dorado of the world today, they have a robust immigration system. That's to say, They have opened their borders of people with technology, with engineering, with medical doctors, and so on. And they are coming, and these are the people that are building the country. So if African countries are feeling that, opening their borders to other Africans is going to be a disservice, they are missing the mark.
Thank you for that insight, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU. Coming back to you, Mr. Eke, in the same perspective, according to report, Africa actually loses billions of US dollars annually to illicit financial flows, and we continue to look at Africa's diplomacy in dealing with all of these. In our preamble today, we highlighted the fact that in the days, that was back in 1963, the leaders of the African continent at the time were already aware, and they saw that the African continent was more and more attractive to the rest of the world, and it has even increased today in the present geopolitical, geoeconomic context. So the question is, how can, with all of these that has happened, how can the continent redefine, or under the African Union, redefine its maybe diplomacy to be able to instead capitalize on the advantages of these multipolarity, multilateralism, particularly on the continent for its own benefits?
I think the key area that we agree on here is for Africa to really be developed, as the goal has been, as the different goals, appear on the Agenda 2063. We have to use all the tools in our, toolbox, diplomacy, all the different tools that we have, to really get to a point where we have a voice that is that is meaningful when we speak. Mm-hmm. But in order for us to get there, there are things that we need to put in place. And the most notorious one of them, the most notorious tool that we need to put in place is infrastructure. Again, we're coming back to that.
Yeah.
Because we believe infrastructure is going to open up Africa. If people have to migrate from one country to another one, they have all the different infrastructure, all those different tools available for them to do that. If there is a hub somewhere where there is a growth, there is a high growth, whether it's in the technology sector, in the finance sector, or any other sector, people who are desiring to go to that place, to that country, and work there, they should be able to go and do. Just like my colleague just mentioned, Canada and the United States, who are opening up their borders. When I look at the United States with this border that we talk about all the time, border issue, people are coming in, all that stuff. Where somewhere they're doing it on purpose too, because they're seeing that although normally those people are illegal, but I have a feeling that there is, some part of me tells me that there is a part of willingness of the American institutions to allow those people to come in the country so they can keep, producing for the country, and so the country stays, on top of the world. Because when we look at China doesn't give a lot of, children anymore. Population is aging, and China is going to remain the same China in 20, 30, 40 years, if they don't allow other people to come in, and then, so that is a challenge. That's going to be a challenge. We see how they solve that. But within Africa, we can do that. We can allow people to go from Ghana to Nigeria to Cameroon to South Africa to Congo to wherever they want to go, provided that we have infrastructure in place.
Sure.
If we look at the infrastructure right now, only 25, when it comes to transportation, for example, only 25% of Africa's rural population is served by all-season roads, compared to 90%, for example, in the northern countries. We have about, in terms of energy, we have over 600 million Africans that lack access to electricity. We got so much power shortages and blackouts. What about internet? Internet is like only 40% of Africa, has seen internet. And let's talk about the basic one, the water. We have less than 70% of the population that has access to safe drinking water. So we have a big issue. We have a big gap. And when we look at the projections from different entities like the African Development Bank, they're talking about a financing gap between 68 and 100 billion dollars every year that needs to be put in place into infrastructure. And that is going to be the tool, the real awakening of Africa once we have this infrastructure. All these developed countries started by building roads. You look at Canada, US, Europe, you have to build highways, roads, trains, boats sometimes, and airplanes. You have to have all this infrastructure in place. You look at China today; it's humongous when you go to China. It's like you're coming from Mars or something. That place is just so advanced, against all the countries of the world because they understood the importance of infrastructure, and that's what we need to focus, first. And then all these plans that we have, then we can implement them, through various strategies or common strategies, depending on different regions, depending on different agendas from different regions or sub-regions. We have to come together in a way that allows us to build those infrastructure in a way that is useful to all the continents, to be able to, for all the continental members or to all the Africans to be able to travel, to do business anywhere. That is the first thing we have to put in place. Otherwise, we're still going to be talking about this 20 years from now, 30 years from now. What should we do? What about Africa? What should we do? It becomes redundant, and I don't like these redundant debates. It gets me tired.
Absolutely.
Right. So.
The goal is to see that decisions are being taken. Now,
That's right.
Still with you, Mr. Eke.
Right.
You pointed out a whole lot of things, and really looking at Africa in the world, or the position of Africa, and it's often said that what holds a country or a continent, it's its economic prowess. And we still want to take in the example of China and the Russian Federation. According to a recent report, trade has actually increased between the two countries, and they are actually using their local currencies to trade among themselves. So let's bring us back to the African continent. When do you think it is very feasible that with this increase in multilateralism, it will be a push for African countries to come to that conclusion of having a single currency that will facilitate trade across the African continent? And also, in your perspective, what do you think are those tenets that can hold this the benefit, Africa to benefit from this increasing multilateralism?
Right. So here we're coming back to the BRICS again as the most notorious organizations in place right now to achieve those that multilateralism and de-dollarization,
Yeah.
and South-South relation, trade. So those are all important avenues and tools that we have at our disposal. When it comes to the currency, achieving one giant continent, one currency for the whole continent, I don't know if it's realistic at this point. I don't even know if it's something that we I don't even know if it's really that's what we should be doing. We have different sizes, different of economies across the continent. We have different resources. We have different history, and because currency also is part of a sovereign, it's part of the important tools for sovereignty for different countries.
Yeah.
So it means a lot for people. That's why you see, for example, England, Great Britain, they don't want to do away with their pound, right? So it's a tool that they hold dear. Some countries may hold, their currency, very, very near to them. So they don't want to relinquish that sovereignty. So what I would suggest instead is to do what China and Russia, what they're doing. Trade with your currencies, folks. It's simple. Let's start with that. Trade with your currency. We don't have to put, all criteria like the euro currency, all different criteria, about this and that. You need to meet 3%, and then 5 years later or 10 years later, no one can meet. You look at France, look at all these European countries. Where are they with those criteria when they were going into euro? They're all scattered, right? Everybody is in the terrors, so other agenda is gone, it's long gone. So it's not realistic. We have to observe what is happening in the zone euro. We don't want to repeat that. And so we can have our own currency. Everybody wants to be, we can preserve our own, history, our own sovereignty, but we can still do business within ourselves, our countries. If I want to go to Nigeria and buy something, hey, I can go there and buy it with the, with the naira money, currency, and the guy from Nigeria wants to come to Cameroon and buy, he can come and buy with Cameroon currency, and that's fine. But the issue is that the one world vision that we have, that we have today from the United States, from Europeans, they don't want to see that happening because that's going to weaken the dollar. If we do that, then we don't need the dollar anymore, and that's going to affect U.S. economy, and they don't want that. They don't want us to trade within our currencies. They don't want that because they need people to need the dollar so they can, use the dollar as the most important reserve currency in the world and keep that power and transfer all this inflation that we're building here, transferring all these bubbles that we're building in U.S. markets, and transfer all those things to the whole world so that they don't, they don't feel the pain of being being responsible, of bearing the pain of their behaviors here, because that's the key issue. That's why they're fighting BRICS so much. They don't want what's happening, but that's what we need to do. And in order for us to do that, we can be within different groups, organizations, and so that we can be part of a powerful group that speaks a truth to power to the United States for essentially, and let us trade between ourselves, because right now we're very weak. So it's a lot of challenges that we need to be able to maneuver like that. Our continent has to go through, but we have to do what needs to be done in order for us to be able to be free.
Indeed, if Africa begins to give itself a value through its leaders, I think the others will valorize the continent as well. Just to remind our televiewers that this is Global Insight on For You Media Africa, a discursive program where we give insight into topical issues affecting the African continent and the global world at large, and how particularly Africa can define its perspectives from these changing dynamics. We're going to continue the discussion with you, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU. Taking from what Mr. Eke said, I want to look at maybe the fact that if Africa trades within itself using local currencies, it's going to weaken international currencies, particularly the dollar. And now, do you think, or can we to an extent say that Africa is still lagging behind because it lacks a strong voice at the international level when it has to do with taking some, economic decisions which will actually determine the economic trajectory of every nation or continent?
Paris, before I answer your question, permit me to disagree a little bit with my colleague there when it comes to this issue of monetary policies in Africa, because that's something that I was looking at in one other research that I was looking at.
Yeah.
Africa is losing a lot because of these paper tiger monies that we have in Africa. Africa has the 20th weakest currencies in the world are all in Africa. Those currencies are paper tigers. Africa needs to get rid of that. If we continue to hammer and say sovereignty, some countries want to maintain their currency because of sovereignty, that is one of the causes where the African Union is as weak as it is.
Sure.
Because every country thinks that if they give this and give up this and give up this, we're going to lose our sovereignty. Are we more concerned about sovereignty, or we're concerned about the standard of living or the livelihood of the people? Because when all this is harmonized, the standard of living of every individual in that country is going to be improved, is going to increase. When we are talking about independence, the question is, what does it bring to the table in terms of the helping the local people, improving their standard of living? If you look at what is happening in African currencies, if they have to trade, just taking by what my colleague said, I'm not totally disagreeing with him. It's a good thing for African countries to trade among themselves. But you're looking at weak currencies, and most of the time, there is no direct exchange between one African currency and the other. They always use an intermediary currency, either the dollar or the euro or whatever currency they are using. It becomes an intermediary currency because the United States and all these big countries, they will not allow that happen. They always want the dollar to be an intermediary. So when you trade in dollars, for example, if most of the commodities, you don't sell them in local currencies, whether it's oil and gas and so on, there's petrodollars, they go through that in order to trade. They do not, Nigeria will not trade with CFA. There's no way, it doesn't happen. Well, the local person will do that. But when we're talking about economy, we're talking about big businesses. We're not talking about somebody's going to sell bananas, sell it in Naira and sell it in CFA. We're talking about big businesses, conglomerates, international organizations. They don't mostly deal in local currencies. Yeah. They will go through the dollar as an exchange, and then from the dollar to whatever currency you are dealing with. They will not agree to deal with you directly with their local currency. It will not happen. We know the mechanism that this United States and all these other countries have put in place to prevent that from happening, because they will lose. But if we had an African monetary policy that has harmonized all that, there is no way that the United States or Britain or the euro will stand down from trading with Africa, a single currency in Africa. It's not a global world order. That's not what it is. I'm not going to all the politics around world order or whatnot. It's monetary policies that harmonizes and make sure that Africa gains from what they are producing. So all these discussions about sovereignty and losing of sovereignty, which a lot of Pan-Africanists are putting ahead as the hindrance, the reason why some countries are resisting this or resisting this. I feel if we have at the bottom of our heart, when we are making policies, or we're looking at harmonizing the lifestyle of the people at the end of the day, all these other discussions will be secondary, because we are looking at if we are going to come up with the policies that are going to better the life of the people at the end of the day. That's what should matter. Any other consideration should be secondary. Yeah. We talked about, why, coming back to your question, is it because Africa does not have a seat at the international level? Let me tell you what the problem is, Karish, and gentlemen that are listening to us. Africa is not an attractive environment as we speak. One of the things that we do at our center is to collect data, work with these conglomerates, work with governments, work with international NGOs, to present to them the real information and the real data in terms of feasibility studies of what it is that is existing in many African countries. We have collaborators and researchers all of Africa that we work with. We present them with real data of the situation in Africa, because as we speak, it is not because Africa, they are being looked down upon, which, possibly they are, but the data that is coming from Africa is based on maybe CNN, is based on maybe BBC, is based on war, is based on disease, is based on everything that is negative. Sure. But in terms of concrete information of what Africa presents to the world, not just the business environment, but real data as to the potential of investing in Africa, they are not available to the international community. They only depend on what they see on radio, TV, and all the like. So one of the things we work with is to present real data of people on the ground, statistics, quantitative verifiers, and feasibility studies to present to NGOs and governmental organization and see this is what Africa is. Nobody here all over TV or all over the world. And some of them, when they receive this data, they act differently. So Africa, as we speak, the same thing Dangote was talking about, because I listened to his speech. Africa is not attractive because there is no organization or an NGO or whoever that is going to go and invest, that is going to produce in Africa just based on their own, cash flow. You need to borrow. If you look at the refinery that Dangote built in Nigeria, it is not just his money. It is because international partners, they looked at his business model and they said, if we borrow money to this guy, if we work with this guy, we've seen what he's doing. He has an attractive business model. Therefore, we give him money. I don't know the numbers, but I can guarantee you that less than 10% of that money that Dangote used to build that refinery was his own. But he has partners because they've seen his business model. African business model is not attractive as we speak. That is the reason why we are getting hammered. I always say this on your show most of the time. If you go to the Bretton Woods institutions where a lot of countries go and borrow money, you look at how Africa is borrowing money. Africa is borrowing money at close between 10 to 15%. The same country, the same Western countries will go to the same institutions and borrow money at 0.5%. Africa will now spend all its time servicing the debts. Instead of actually investing in the country, they'll spend all their time servicing that debt. So because why? African countries have been rated very low within those Bretton Woods institutions as high-risk countries. So when they go to borrow money, they'll give that at those rates. So Africa needs to work on removing some of these barriers. That's why we keep saying that those barriers, be it sovereignty, be it what, it is harming Africa. It is not improving or helping Africa. As long as we do not remove those barriers, we will not be attractive to the rest of the world. And therefore, whether you're talking about international organizations or sitting at the table, people will respect you when you come to the table with muscles. You show what you can. Why do you think that when the Euro, ECOWAS, when they were coming together and were trying to bring about the ECO, why do you think France and the rest of the country manipulated and they crumbled the whole thing? They know that if ECOWAS come out with one currency that they are going to trade with, the CFA is going to be at the background, and they're going to lose a lot of advantages. So, again, I think that when we talk in Africa as Pan-Africanists, sovereignty should be the last thing that we are talking about. We should talk about harmonizing our policies so that the ordinary man benefit. As we speak today, if you go and look at the Naira, the Naira is already a paper tiger money as we speak. Why? Because they cannot compete as a single currency. If they were competing as a currency within ECOWAS, the Naira will not be where it is today.
Okay, of course, and those are some of the lapses or the points we need to address as a continent, both the private sector and even our governments, like President Paul Kagame of Rwanda underlined recently, that to be able to solve some of those problems which you have highlighted, Dr. Elijah, it is imperative for the private sector to work together with the African governments so they can provide continental solutions to continental problems, and also to note that in what aspect you highlighted, the president of the African Development Bank recently noted that it is imperative to showcase the successes and opportunities that African countries or the African continent have to be able to, attract more investment and maybe answer the question of maybe Africa risks premium. And he focused this on urging that we should have a platform, a media platform for the African continent that will be globally respected, where we bring the African stories, the realities of the African continent, focusing on the available data, which you said that will help to attract foreign direct investment and see to it that we attain the milestone that the continent needs at the moment. Now we continue looking at the interconnectedness of the world, Mr. Eki. So we want to look at how these multilateral organizations. Earlier on, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU highlighted the European Union and the reasons why they actually advocated for some points in their preamble. So now, with all of these faced by the African continent, how can multilateral organizations and African governments collaborate more in the 21st century to address the challenges associated with implementing particularly the African Continental Free Trade Area, which will in turn maximize its potential benefits for economic growth and regional integration across the continent?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to answer that, but let me just clarify one point with that Dr. ENOAKU raised when we were disagreeing a little bit with me earlier. We all agree on the goal. I'm just talking about from where we stand right now. I know people are trading with local currency implies using the dollar as the intermediary currency, right? So we see today with what BRICS is doing, they have created what is called a stable coin that allows different countries with different currency to be able to trade, minimizing, if not, with no fee at all in terms of conversion fees or transfer fees or all these things, right? So the goal being that we get to one whole African currency. We can start by trading amongst us using that kind of tool, that's like a stable coin, so that we don't need to have the dollar, because the goal here is to take away the influence of the dollar in our economy. It's as long as we depend on that, we're not going to achieve that goal. So we've used something like a stable coin, as suggested by the Russian finance minister, for the BRICS to be able to trade amongst themselves. Then that would be a good solution, because it's going to be very, very easy for African countries to trade among themselves. Now, when it comes to the different powers of these different currencies, different countries, well, the size of the economy matters, right? So if you have a weak economy, effectively, you're going to have a weak currency. But that within the African continent, at least you can trade with another country without needing an external element that's going to really take away off all the trade power that you may have, and which is the dollar here. So that is just the emphasis I wanted to put on here. All right, so in terms of how do Africans communicate amongst themselves, which is the question that you ask. Well,
now, looking at the collaboration between African government and multilateral organizations now in addressing the challenges associated with implementing the African Continental Free Trade Area to maximize this potential benefits for economic transformation of the African continent and regional integration.
Okay, so if we look at the different goals, that the African free trade has, put in place, we can see that it's important that we get to a point where at the AU level we have some kind of let's say law, or I don't know, decisions that all the different members of AU should abide by in order for us to achieve this. We can't do it, by different people's will. We can't go by different people's will, or I don't want to do this. I'm a sovereign country. I'm going to do what I want because blah blah blah. Just like Dr. ENOAKU mentioned earlier, we have to really come together, unified, strong, so we can speak in a very powerful voice, in front of these multilateral institutions. Otherwise, if you go, alone or dispersed with different views, we are going to be here in the next 50 or 100 years. So that is the issue. So communication here is going to be, in a way, getting those different head of states together, working together, putting strategies together to win the day, to win against their adversary. That is the only communication we need. We don't want people sitting on TV and talking. We're tired of that. So we need action now, and action requires people to sit at the table, put together plans, and then, based on the objective, the goals has been defined by the Agenda 2063. We know what we need to do. We know where we're going. We have a vision already, and that is a good thing. Now, how to achieve that is where the issues the different issues are, and every country with its own difference, its own particularity. They have to put that on the side in order to be able to achieve that. Otherwise, there is no way we can go forward. All these multilateral institutions, they are just there to make money. They're there to make money, and they're going to, prey on you if you're weak. If you keep being weak, you don't want to find a way to get together, to get stronger. They're going to rip you off. And that's what they do. The IMF, the World Bank, they are business people. Look at what they did to Niger the other day. They decided to give Nigeria, how much was that? 400 billion, I believe. In that number, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Nanku. What was that? 400 billion of dollar that they're giving to, was it Mali? I believe it was Mali. And Niger also, I believe. So they give you money even if we don't request it. Why? Because they understand the power of money. It's control. It allows them to be able to control you. So they come to you, even though they have a difficulty with the United States nowadays, they still give money to Niger. Why? Because they want to keep that relationship. They want you to be there. They want to keep you, to control you. Even though on the military or on the sovereign aspect, you kick them out of the country, they still want to do business with you because it's important for them to be able to control you. Now, how do you avoid that? By coming together with your peers, with your other country mates, or other countries in the continent at the AU level, and then working towards finding, sustainable strategies that are going to allow the whole continent to free itself from those different traps that they put us in all the time. So that's the main communication that needs to happen, because I'm tired of seeing African presidents going different countries. You got to summit, different summits, United States, Africa, China, Africa, France, Africa. Soon we're going to have, I don't know, Lesotho. What? It's just ridiculous because we don't speak in one voice. German, you got German Africa. We got. It's insane. So there's no respect. I heard the other day was Saudi Arabia, Africa. I was like, wow, even Saudi Arabia. Oh, okay, maybe another country, maybe Nepal, Africa too. Maybe what are we all looking for? What are we trying to achieve here? So that is the problem. We need to sit down, strategize, talk among ourselves, real communication, strategize, and then come out with a global plan, an African AU plan that every country in Africa is going to follow. When we go out there and meet those different countries, we speak in one voice. We have the same objective. We have the same strategies that all of the continents are adopting. So we are not scattered and we are strong. Then when we go to the IMF, to the World Bank, you say, hey, listen, IMF, that money that you want to give us, I don't want at that rate. We want you to give us at 2%, at 1%. If you don't want to do it, we have another option. We can go to China. Okay. We can go to the BRICS. We can go to Russia. We can go to, so then people are going to start listening to us. So that is the communication.
Indeed. In the same perspective, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, I think you already touched this angle. These are some of the stakes that we are looking at on today's program, Global Insight, and giving proposals as to how the African Union can solve some of these problems. Now that we have highlighted the challenges faced by the continental bloc, the question is, what practical reforms can we implement at the level of the African Union to be able to harmonize all of these things and present it to the advantage of the continent?
I know some people might not like my answer, but that is the truth. The whole cream of leadership of African Union need to be booted out. I'm telling you the truth. The cream of leadership that we have within the African Union, they have no vision they have. They are not willing to relinquish whatever archaic idea they have. They have no direction. And I will give you an example. When you have people, even young people, with ideas, things change. When Julius Malema of South Africa was elected one of the members of the African Parliamentary Group, it's a group, it's like an arm of the African Union where the members of parliament from every country, they select their representatives and they go there and they discuss ideas. Within a space of 1 year, if you see the changes that Julius Malema and the rest of his radical gang have changed within the parliamentary group, if Dr. RASHIED was on this program, he will confirm. He's, I think he's the leader of that group. I had a discussion with him. That is the #1 problem we have, Clarice. We do not have leaders with vision on the African continent. Everybody's trying to protect their role. Everybody's trying to protect their interest. And that is where we are today. If we still continue with the current cream of leadership within the African Union, I'm telling you the truth, I don't want to be pessimistic, but it will be a long way for us. The current cream of the African Union needs to go. Those guys have no vision. They have nothing left in them. It's like they, I don't know, the French must say, I've forgotten that French word. That's, you have exhausted everything that is in you, and there's nothing else you can give.
Yeah.
That is the current cream that we have within the African Union right now. Those guys have exhausted whatever they have, and they are just there for their stomach. They are just there to, occupy positions. When we have young radical leaders with radical ideas, the African Union will go ahead. Now, in that notwithstanding, within the context in which we have now, I'm just giving you practical radical ideas that will move this thing forward. Like my colleague, Mr. EKEU said, the African Union, if you look at the 10 pillars, whether you're talking about the formulation of continental free trade, or you're talking about a passport and a free movement of people, or you're talking about the silencing of the gun, or you're talking about, what is the other one again, implementation of the Inga Dam, or you're talking about, what is the other one, about 10 of them, the establishment of African Economic Forum, all those are good projects.
Yeah.
As we speak, I was doing some research on this because I work with a couple of them in a different forum. Yeah. I was doing some research on what concrete things is on the ground as to this, All of them are still at the level of committees. How many years will it take for a committee to finalize its finding and present it for adoption and follow-up? How many years? That's to tell you the level of lethargy at which we are at Clarice. When I talk about leadership, when was the the Agenda 2063, when did they start? That was, I think if I remember, was in Lagos, Lagos, Nigeria. Or was it Abuja? I can't remember where they instituted this. I've forgotten. But it's been close to 4 to 5 years. And you still have committees that are still working there. Some of them have not even presented their findings, because all these 10 pillars that were mentioned were just 10 pillars that were crafted, but committees were designated to sit down and come up with practical modalities on how they can be implemented. If you don't even have a platform that a committee has already come out and say, this is what we need to start, step 1, step 2, step 3, and put concrete action on the ground, what are we talking about? What are you going to implement? So again, I still believe in the core of myself that the current cream of African Union leadership need to go. We need people with radical ideas that will put shovel on the ground. Immediately something comes out, we start something. Even if there's a mistake on the way, it can be corrected. But simply saying a committee is taking 5, 6, 7 years to come out with what needs to be done is unattainable. So again, I don't have a concrete answer. My concrete answer is that the current cream of leadership need to go, and a new one needs to come in place.
Mr. EKEU, you may want to comment to that. Of course, the question now is the scope. Do you think the current African Union has the greater scope for implementation of continental projects? And if no, what do you think can be done, or is that practical reform that needs to be brought in?
Well, I mean, I understand what Dr. Nwanko was saying. It's important that we have a new breed of leaders who are really who are free of the colonizing mind, the colonization mindset, and every time we have a new president like Ruto, you have Ruto in Kenya that comes to power. We see some of his action. We see, we have one good leader, and the way he speaks, he can speak truth to power. He spoke truth to the French president at the summit in France recently. He did this, he did that. And then he goes back and does the opposite of what he said. That drives us crazy. We have another one that just came from in Senegal, the new elected president. He came with all the power from the people, all the energy, the Senegalese people put behind him. And then where does he go? The first 3 trips, he goes to Mauritania, he goes to Côte d'Ivoire. He goes to Côte d'Ivoire. What is that? Those are not people who believe in Africa. Those are people who are sold. They've sold their souls to Europe, to the European countries. So the real Africans, we want leadership, African leaders. To the new breed that we're looking for are Pan-Africanist leaders that are going to focus on developing Africa first. It's just like, Trump always says, United States first, Africa first. It should be our mantra for every leader that comes to power, so we can build what we need, in order for the continent to get out of the situation it is now. I mean, it's been there for forever. So we need a new breed, and that's why I totally agree with what Dr. Nwanko said. We need to, get rid of all these people, because really, we have different versions of the same people that come to power and fool, and those people come and fool the population all the time. So we need the Malema, the Julius Malema type. We need the those military folks in Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso. We need people with that same mindset. If they happen to be military people, so be it. Because if civilian people are too weak to be able to have a position and stand by their position because they don't want to die, they want to see their kids grow, like we say in Africa, everybody is enfant grandi. If we are in that mindset, we never go anywhere, because those people are easily corruptible. If they want to, people like military folks, they don't care. They know their life, they're destined to die. That is a fact. So that's a given. They have already integrated that in their lives. So there's no fear. Let's go and do what we need to do. And that's what we need to do. We need to do that. And just what happened to France. We look at de Gaulle. De Gaulle was a military person. No civilian was able to give France its independence. So those military people have a different mindset. And that's what we don't have in Africa. So if that's what we need to have, then we have to get those military people in power, in the whole continent, so we can have, a continent that can get together, work together, put things in place for the whole, for population to benefit, even if they have to leave. We look at General Islands in Ghana, we look at all different, there's so many different military leaders that came and put the country in a good pace so that the civilian can come in and enjoy it. But, in order for us to get that in Africa, it's going to be tough, because they have so much pressure coming from different parts of the continent, different parts of the world, especially the United States, who's always putting his nose everywhere. They just went to Niger and prevented Niger from selling its uranium to Iran. Who are you to tell me who to send my raw material to? Yeah. So it's those kind of stuff, and those and they do it on purpose. They know they have a lot of strength, a lot of power, and they can put sanctions on you and crumble your economy. But in order for us to avoid that, we need to be linked to countries that can help us prevent those big countries like the United States from pushing the agenda on us, from menacing us, from threatening us. And that's why I keep coming back to that military dimension, that defense dimension. Dr. Nwanko, we and I had a conversation about the defense dimensions of Africa, and you seem to disagree. You seem to think more of education first. I happen to think both are not mutually exclusive. We can have a strong defense that the continent can have a strong defense because in order for you to be free from those pressures, from those predators. You need to have a strong system that can protect you and keep away those predators from coming in the first place.
Okay.
So in order for you to do that, you have to align yourself with people, with countries that can protect you, like Russia, China, if necessary, Turkey, and other countries that can sell you the material, the military materials that you need to protect your country. So when you make a very strong decision that's going to hurt those foreign countries, they will not come the next day and bomb your country because they don't like what you took, what you see, the decision that you took. So I think doing it mutually, at the same time that we're working on the economics, of Africa, is critical, because if we don't have a strong defense, whatever we're doing is going to crumble, because it's not going to benefit next generation. It could be for 10 years, 30 years, until the next corrupt civilian comes to power and sells, the country back to the Europeans or to the Americans. So if you have a strong system within the continent to defend ourselves, like I'm seeing the confederation that's being built at the silent, between the three silent countries, they're working on putting down a confederation. That is going to be very powerful. And then if they have strong infrastructure, strong military might, that could prevent someone like Ouattara, some tiny guy that's called the guy from Benin.
Let's not give appellations which are insulting to individuals.
Okay, anyway, I don't mean to say that, but we have to say the things that that are hurting us. We have to put that out so people know that it's offensive for people to know that one country is trying to free itself from a predator, and the next country, his neighboring country, is trying to to host that predator so that he can destroy it. That's not fair. Patrice Talon, that's his name.
Yeah,
right.
Yes,
so anyway.
Yeah, thank you for that. Quite insightful. Now, what you talked about, it's about time Africa defines its own agenda, and that's why I'm coming to you again to accentuate on this particular aspect, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU. It's about understanding the dynamics which happen across the global world, particularly that with the advent of the internet, it has made it very possible for us to understand how the systems of the world work, and how especially the supposed superpowers of the world dictate and make policies which favor them more than developing nations. So the question is, how can the African Union define its own, politics? We are looking at politics that will maybe counteract some of these decisions at the international level that will in turn favor the continent and even solve some of the internal problems that we are facing as a continent in present-day society.
In order to answer your question, let me pick on something my colleague, Mr. EKEU, said. Not to disagree with him, but to build on that this time around. He mentioned the REAS, that's the Sahel region, that's Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, that are coming together. Their strength is in that unity. Their strength is in that unity, not in their military might. Their strength is in the fact that they have come together, brought their resources together, and they are able to act as one. That is why the United States, Britain, and the European Union are afraid of. Now, if you look at Gaddafi, when Gaddafi was being killed, African countries joined the NATO alliance and agreed with them to take out Gaddafi. If African Union has stood together to withstand that Western influence, I don't think they would have gone in. So the number one problem is the lack of unity of purpose within African countries. That is what Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali are supplying, are teaching us an example that if African countries come together on a single platform, like he mentioned, the real word is confederation. Mali is not losing its sovereignty. Neither is Niger losing its sovereignty. But they're coming together as a confederation, something that I've spoken about in a lot of conferences when it comes to Pan-Africanism. That is what we should be thinking about. When we have a confederation of African states with unity in agenda, purpose, military, economy, finance, education. As we speak now, the French is almost about to be abolished in those countries. The French is almost, so they are now instituting the use of the local language to be recognized as the African, as a language, as an official language in those countries. So this is what we are talking about, unity of purpose together to unite on a common platform and have a single agenda that can be implemented across those countries. When this is done, ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, the West will listen to Africa. The West will listen to us. They know that they're able to manipulate us, Clarice, because they are able to use one another to fight one brother and the other. If you look at the war that's happening, Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, you have Kagame is involved, Congo is involved, Zimbabwe is involved, Uganda is involved, Angola is involved, about 7 African countries. And do you know what's happening? What's happening is that countries within the European Union, it's not the European Union, I don't want to call them, we know who they are. Countries within the European Union, they go in there and they're manipulating one country against the other. Why? Because when you talk of the Apples of the world, you talk of the Nokia of the world, you talk of the EV batteries of the world, you talk about the technology of the world, the natural resources and the minerals that you need to produce those things are coming from the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. So therefore, they are able to manipulate one country against another, and the fighting continues forever because their interest is going to be harnessed. I mean, they're going to harness what they want. Now, let's take the same region and say, this region had one policy because they are all bordering one another. If you look at that region, all these countries are bordering one another. Whether it is a military, we don't care. Like my colleague said, if the military is going to bring what the people want, so be it. We don't care. All we don't care about is that there's no loss of life, people killing others and so on, and anarchy. As long as, there's peace and tranquility, whosoever is ruling doesn't really matter to us in Africa. So we don't need to depend on the West and say democracy is the only way to rule a country. Democracy is the only form of government that works. No.
Is subjective.
Whatever works for Africa is going to, if it's going to take a Traore over there, it's going to take whoever to bring peace and bring unity in Africa, so be it, if that's the way we're going to go. So let's take an example that these other countries within the Congo region came together and they formulated something like what the Sahel region is doing. Do you think these European countries that are coming in to manipulate one country against the other will be able to get into the Congo? No. How is it possible that you have a rebel group, in a country that has paramilitary helicopters, machine gun helicopters? It is not Rwanda that's giving them. Rwanda does not have that money to supply M23 military helicopters that have machine guns mounted on them, that is fighting an institutionalized government of Democratic Republic of Congo. How is it possible? These are supplied by countries in the European Union because they are exploiting those minerals, and it is for their own interest. So the number one problem is lack of unity among us. That is what they are exploiting. Lack of unity among us, because we've seen it, as I said, in the Sahel region. We've seen it. United States, that was against these military powers, like my colleague said, we read the reports. They have now gone in to give them money that was not requested for. Why do you think is that? These regions now have the upper hand to dictate the terms of the agreement. That is why the United States and all these countries are now going in to supply the money that they didn't want, and they're begging them to take the money, because that is what it is, Clarice. When you are being respected, when you have the upper hand, people will come for you. You will not go begging, like my colleague said.
Absolutely,
Sudan,
Dr.
Dubai African Conference, Japan African Conference, United States African Conference, France African, one country bringing 55 countries together. What for? One country bringing 55 countries together. It's a shame for Africa. So our number one problem is that we are not united. When we are united, a lot of these problems will be resolved. We'll put aside the little things, because, as I said from the beginning, Clarice,
let me interject you, Dr. ENOAKU, but I am interjecting to stay with you, so I don't actually forget what I had to say. It's about what you have said. Now, is it about understanding international politics and redefining maybe Africa's stance on this? And now when we look at the fact that it is still not feasible, given that the realities have come to the ground, things like, governance lapses, maybe poor capacity building and, coordination to overcome obstacles, or lack of coordination to overcome obstacles to achieving the objective outlined in the preamble of the Agenda 2063. So is it that there is still a lack in comprehending that international politics and how Africa can adapt its own that will suit the continent?
No, Clarice, it is lack of the political will. It's lack of political will to implement the policies that are in place. That's what the problem is. Because there are low-hanging fruits that, like my colleague already said, there are low-hanging fruit that we can start with. Mm-hmm. It doesn't take much to harmonize the visa system in Africa that, Kenya has already started. It doesn't take much.
Sure.
It doesn't take much to say we are going to remove the barriers of visa restrictions, because there are a lot of businesses in Africa that want to establish international recognition and international presence in many other countries in Africa. These countries, these companies and organizations are hammered by these restrictions. We heard about even companies that, we have a gentleman on your show that was saying that he has businesses in Equatorial Guinea, he has businesses in Congo, he has businesses in Rwanda. It is very difficult for him to travel within these countries to do his business because of visa restrictions and regulations and registration of his company in these countries and then hiring people. It is very difficult for him to do that. So those low-hanging fruits which we can start with, that does not require a lot of resources and capital and so on. Why can't we do that? Again, it is because a lack of political will to implement those policies. It's not that our people do not know international politics and the benefits that will accrue from doing these things. The political will is not there. We do not have people who have that political will to change the dynamics. We have people who either they have given everything they can give, they have no more ideas, or they just want to sit tight and enjoy the money from whatever organization or country they are in. They have no political will to change the status quo. That is the number one problem that we have. The rest can easily be resolved. They always say in English that when there is a will, there is a way. There's nothing that is difficult for us to do as long as the political will is there. So that is the one and the only problem. I don't see lack of political understanding of the dynamics of benefits of removing these trade barriers and doing all this. I don't think that they do not understand. They know. We are not, Africans are very smart, smarter than the Western people. They know these things. It is the lack of political will to implement it that is the problem.
And there is need for the private sector and African governments to collaborate more to be able to attain this milestone. And this brings us to the next question directed to you, Mr. Eke. What strategies do you think we can adopt to be able to attain the milestone in collaboration, with the African private sector and the respective political government that we have across the African continent? What is the perfect strategy?
It's going to be unity, seriously. I mean, the perfect strategy has to be unity. We have to unite. We can put any strategy on paper. We can have the best ideas of the world, but if we can't agree to implement at least the smallest of them, we are just wasting our time. Because if Nigeria implements it and Cameroon doesn't implement it, it's pointless. They're going to get tired of trying to, carry the weight of the whole continent on their back. They're like, okay, they got a few countries that are following what the African Union is saying, and then other countries are not following. So why do I have to waste my time? I've been elected. I have a term of 4 years or 5 years or 7 years, whatever term every African country has, and the population that elected me, I have to respond. I have to be accountable to them. So, but if we unite in a way that Dr. ENOAKU said, and I applauded that a lot when he said, I mean, that was a fiery speech that you made there. It was very, very powerful, and I really appreciate that because if we don't understand that unity is the strength, is the most important strength that we need in order for us to boot every person that is going to contravene against our wills out, then we are just wasting our time. We're just, pretending to be busy to do things, and we're not. So strategy, in terms of strategy, seriously, we have to use all the tools in our toolbox, to be able to achieve that. But we have a vision. There's Agenda 2063 is there. Okay, we have identified, 15 or 20 projects that the whole continent has to focus on in order for us to build, to have the network that we need for Africa to start rising in a way that is very, powerful in the world. And so we have to get that done, and getting that done, getting all these things done is against political will. It's going to be political will. It's going to be unity. It's going to be, training our leaders, our economists, our strategists, all the different people that participate to the economic power, the economic growth of the continent, to have an understanding that this is for Africa. It's not to please Europeans, to please Americans, to do the bidding of some French folks who needs what's called a marché. He needs to get a contract so he can get a little bit of money here and there and squander the program. No, we need to come together and figure out within Africa. And we have people like Dangote who are big business people. They have companies that we can work with, that I have in mind that Africa needs to be, a leader in the next century. If not at the end of this century, we have to see that Africa is really, has really come around from where it was, 100 years, 200, 700 years ago, and then it's taking a turn today. It's becoming a more respectful, more powerful country, like we see today with the iOS countries, right? So we need to have those kind of people that are going to get these things done, because we already written everything. We're all smart. We know what to do. We just have to have the will to do that.
Indeed, it's about having the way to do that. Still on the point of strategy across the African continent, the three nations in the Sahel, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, actually have been hailed across the continent for the decisions which they have taken pertaining defending the sovereignty of their nations and redefining a new face for the continent. Now, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, we want to look at the sustainability of strategies put in place by these revolutionary leaders across the African continent, because I think it's not just about taking decisions like you highlighted earlier on, but it's about ensuring sustainability so that along the line we do not derail from the trajectory or the set objective.
Exactly, Clarice. You hit the nail there. You hit the nail there. Even with regards to, before I even go to that one, let me just add to what my colleague brilliantly explained there. The private sector in Africa is decimated. Because when we talk about the private sector, who is the private sector? It is you and I. The government makes the policies and the laws and a convenient environment for private sector to thrive. The private sector in Africa is completely decimated, because when you look at the private sector depends on credit, financial markets, investment from the banks in order to invest. If you look at the way investment works, nobody walks to the bank and gets 2 million except, well, those billionaires, and gets pull 2 million from his own account. You go to the bank, you present a business plan, and the bank looks at the business plan, look at, Mr. EKEU will better speak better than me on this. He's a banker. The bank will look at it, look at the business plan, look at the risk and asset and everything, and then they'll give you a loan. And then over time, they'll monitor that loan, monitor what you're doing with it to make sure that you're not investing in some risky asset and all whatnot, and then you pay them back. If you look at the private sector in Africa, I was giving an example the other day on a different platform where I was called to talk. I would say, if you look at the stock exchange market, for example, this stock exchange market in Africa, with exception maybe Johannesburg Stock Exchange and maybe Lagos here and there, the rest are black boxes. Nobody know anything.
Yeah.
Look at the CEMEC region. When they brought the stock exchange discussion to the CEMEC region, Cameroon was fighting with Gabon. They say, oh, it has to be in Douala. The other people say, oh, it has to be in Libreville. Finally, we don't hear about anything. There was something that they said, oh, the stock exchange market in Douala. I traveled across West Africa, and Central Africa. I don't hear anything. You don't see anything being advertised as stock exchange. You don't see who is investing in what markets exist, and so on and so forth. So the private sector in Africa, it's really, really at a rudimentary level. Mm-hmm. So for them to compete, it's going to be difficult because the market is not there. Not only that, look at the regulatory framework across country. Yeah. Have you ever tried to go and start a business in CEMEC region and look at what you are being asked to present, regulations upon regulation, and then you jump into the ECOWAS region? You have a different regulatory framework. You jump into SADC, South African region, a different regulatory framework. It presents an obstacle for the private sector because you don't know how to deal with all these different framework, different tax regime, different audit regime, different. So the whole thing presents a network of challenges for the private sector in Africa. So the private sector wants to try, but they are nipped at the bud because they are not able to compete. So now back to your question in terms of the
African Union.
Sorry, I didn't get you.
I'm saying all of these, which we have highlighted, actually make it more challenging for the African Union to deliver.
Exactly. So when you look at the strategies, if I remember, that was your question. What are the strategies? Sorry, yes. I forgot your last question.
We were under the aspect of a strategy under the African Union.
Oh, sustainability. Now I remember. Sustainability. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Sustainability.
Now, how are these sustainable? What this Sahel region partners are doing? Absolutely, I would say I'm behind them 100%. Let me give you an example. One of the tools that the West use as a tool of, I don't want to be too negative, but I will say dehumanization of Africans is their culture and their language. The fact that they are currently replacing French with traditional African languages is giving us an identity. That children grow up with an identity that says, we have our own identity and this is who we are. Number two, the fact that they are putting in place institutions that are not going to be vulnerable to dictators to come up and change it and say, oh, the Constitution, I can change the Constitution today, I can run for through this, I can run for that. That is a sustainable aspect of it, because what is happening within the African continent is that you have institutions that are not solid to defend human rights and corruption. Anybody comes up and does something. I was discussing with somebody the other day is that some of the things that we have that's promoting corruption in Africa is you do not have separation of powers within the African states. You just have the executive. The judiciary seems to be a paper tiger. The legislative seems to be a paper tiger in such a way that the executive control all the other branches of government. Yeah. You do not have solid institutions that can stand up to one another and defend the people, defend the Constitution. So what the Sahel region is putting in place to make sure that anybody that comes to power, because they have promised that they're going to relinquish power after a while, but they said they have to form a foundation that will be solid, that nobody will come back and begin to manipulate the constitution and change and say, I can run for 3 terms, I can run for 4 terms, I can run for this.
Yeah.
That is a sustainable strategy that needs to be implemented all African countries.
Okay, masterminded
And
by
if
the
you look
African
at the
Union.
strategy of a single market, once you have put together a framework for a single market that Niger, Burkina Faso, and which the third one, forgot, that they are trading together. I'm telling you, all other
Mali
countries are going to follow. Mali, thank you. All other African countries are going to follow because they are going to see the benefits of that framework. So it is very, very sustainable. And if care is not taken, most other African countries are going to follow that model because when they see, as we speak, ladies and gentlemen, this is data that is verifiable. The fastest growing country in the world is Niger. As we speak, if you look at United Nations Development Index, the fastest growing country in the world now is Niger. So if a military leader can implement strategies that are sustainable as bringing the country to be the fastest growing country in the world economically, that tells you that that is something that the rest of the world to emulate. So
Absolutely.
Yes, I believe in the sustainability in what they are doing over there.
Very imperative, and thank you for the insight, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU. We are almost rounding off, Mr. Eke. Now, we continue to look at how the African Union can be reformed to suit the changing times. You know, a lot is happening across the continent. So how can we attain, you know, what is the way forward to attain a sustained Africa backed by its accomplished representation, especially at the global level? This question, let me just elucidate more for you to understand the question. You know, when we begin to talk about some of these ills which are coming as a result of infiltration of Africa by Western powers or foreign powers, we take the example of Zimbabwe. When Zimbabwe stood against, we saw economic sanctions. And lately, the president of Kenya, William Ruto, has been advocating, calling for sanctions to be uplifted. And now we look at in the time of the former president of the Gambia, Yahya Jammeh. He saw when he stood against some, you know, homosexuality and others. The European Union and other international organizations threatened that they would not give out loans to the country. And particularly when we sit to analyze some of these stakes, we hear you mention that, Mr. Eke, that international organizations, particularly the US, they have the powers to blacklist or to implement sanctions or impose sanctions not only on countries but even on individuals. Now, how can we address this drastically to ensure that Africa regains or gains its position at the international level in deciding decisions or topics or problems that have to do with the African continent?
I think that's a fantastic question. Seriously, Clarice, that's the $1 million question, right? So how do we free ourselves from those influences, you know, or this
sustained African representation at the global level?
At the global level, right?
Sure.
So when you see the case of Zimbabwe and other countries, they're going in alone. They're trying to do things that are nationalistic, you know, but they're doing it alone. There's no one supporting them. They have no support. And then we go back, we look at what happened, when ECOWAS was trying to go to war with Niger, and then out of nowhere, absolutely out of nowhere, and for the first time in Africa, we see Mali and Burkina Faso saying loudly, if you attack Niger, you're attacking us too. And we saw how France and and other countries that were trying to attack Nigeria, they backed away slowly. That changed their mindset. It completely destroyed their plans. They were trying to really, you know, go to war with Niger to put back the the dumb guy who was in power in that country. They were able to back down, and today, that country is thriving. It's the most prosperous country in the world today in terms of GDP growth. So it's the power of unity. So if Zimbabwe had the support of other countries from its region, that would prevent Great Britain and the United States from putting sanctions to Zimbabwe. So it comes down to that. We have to learn from our experiences. We have to learn from what we see, and I think the silent people are really learning. They are very young for the most part, and they really understand geopolitics, in a way that we haven't seen Africa. And that scared the heck out of the United States. That's why they're trying to surround those countries, with military bases everywhere. In Senegal, they have French. You got we have in Benin, we have the United States trying to go to Ivory Coast. They already have those small military bases everywhere. In Nigeria, they were in Cameroon, they were kicked out. So they're trying to control those areas. But this is the template that the whole continent has to follow. And if we do that, then we're going to have a cloud. And the cloud means that on the economic side, if we have that cloud, that respect, that fear, that we are going to install in other countries because they need our resources. Why do they not? They don't want to deal with Africa.
Thank you.
Africa. I'm sorry.
We're almost done. We just have.
You're almost done.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me go. Let me finish. It's a fantastic program today. Seriously. So we have to boost. Intra-African trade, definitely, in order for us to have the economic cloud that is needed, and so after and PIDA are those tools that we're going to use in order for us to get to where we want to go. Collective bargaining power is important. Africa's 54 countries currently we negotiate separately with European and other international organizations. We have to come together and then bargain collectively, so we can have a better outcome from our negotiations. We have to reduce our dependency on aid. Those aids are really traps. They're not aid. They keep you alive. It's like they're putting perfusion on you. I don't know what to say in English, but and they keep you alive, but you're not sure if you're going to live or not. So we got to cut that.
Thank you so much, ACHILLE Eke, for the greater insight. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the program. We appreciate our guest for today, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, also Mr. ACHILLE Eke, for the great analysis on a topic which centered on the African Union and what the scope is for the organization in attaining continental objectives. We'll continue subsequently to discuss on some of these issues that can help bring the African continent to the Africa we want, to the #1 position. Thank you, and I wish you a blissful weekend in the company of programs on For You Media Africa.